Welcome to Module 2, the attachment cycle of TBRI. Here are our group agreements. Again, we will stick together, no hurts, and we will have fun. Here's an overview of the attachment cycle. In Module 2, we will learn what the attachment cycle is, the 4 skills of healthy relationships, giving voice and giving yeses, an introduction to TBRI principles, and willful disobedience versus survival behavior. Just checking in. How are we doing? This is where you would like to write your questions down, things you would want to have addressed after the training. Let's go ahead and jot those things down right now, and we will quickly jump into Module 2. The attachment cycle. Humans never outgrow the need for attachment. In ideal circumstances, infants use caregivers as a secure base from which to explore their physical and social worlds. Infants need to feel safe and know that their caregiver will meet their needs. Infants use attachments with their caregivers as models for future relationships. To fully understand and appreciate how children come to trust safe adults around them, it's important to understand the attachment cycle. When we talk about attachment, we are talking about the unique bond between caregivers and their children. We tend to talk about attachment as something important to infants and very young children. But attachment is important throughout our whole lives. We never outgrow the need for relationships, so we never outgrow the need for attachments. John Bowlby developed attachment theory based on the idea that infants create a special bond with their caregiver. He recognized that in ideal circumstances, infants use caregivers as secure base from which to explore their physical and social worlds. Our early relationships with our caregivers become the model for our future relationships and the way we view the world. Without us even being aware of it, we tend to repeat patterns from our interactions with our caregivers when we are caring for our children. Our caregiving history also shows up in our relationships with other significant people in our lives, like our partners and close friends. Let's listen.
So we want to spend some time talking about attachment. And when we talk about attachment, we're really talking about this attachment cycle that happens hundreds of thousands of times with infants and their primary caregivers. So here's what we mean. You're going to see on the attachment cycle that at the top it says need expressed. And then you see kind of going down that side of the cycle, we see that those infants are in distress. And then at the bottom, the need is met and they're comforted. So let's talk about what that looks like. Let's say I have a 9-month-old and it is 2 a.m. How do I know that 9-month-old is in distress? She's crying, right? So I hear that 9-month-old crying and she's in distress, and I come as her primary caregiver and I meet her need and she calms down. What was that need? Was she hungry? Let's say she's hungry. So that 9-month-old is hungry, she's crying. I come, I feed her, and she calms down. But 2 minutes later, she starts fussing again. Why? Well, now she needs burped. So I burp that baby, and she calms down. I've already gone through this cycle twice, right? But after I burp the baby, she starts wiggling and fussing because now she needs help to fall asleep. So then I help her fall asleep. right? And hundreds of thousands of times in the first year or two of life, we are doing this with infants. And every single time we complete this cycle, what we're saying to them is yes. Yes, I hear you. Yes, you're important. Yes, I'll come. Yes, I'll feed you. Yes, I'll keep you warm, right? Every single time. Yes, I'll find that hair that's wrapped around your baby toe and get it off, right? Yes, 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 yes. Hundreds of thousands of times. And in TBRI, we call that the giving of yeses. It's like putting money into the bank. And for 2 years, I'm just putting money into that relational bank and saying yes every time, until the first time I have to say no. And for me, I remember with my youngest, the first time I said no, she was about 18 months old, and I had given her a pin to keep her occupied, and she was sitting on the floor playing with the pin. And I saw her look at the light socket and then look at the pen and then look at the light socket. And she started walking toward the light socket with the pen as if she were going to put the pin into the light socket. And I said, Charlie Kate, no. And I think it was the first time she'd ever heard that word. And I actually have a picture of her standing there because she stood there for about 3 minutes like this. She was shocked. My no was so powerful to her. And she listened. Why? Because all she'd ever gotten from me was yes. Yes, you're important. Yes, you matter. Yes, I hear you. And so when I said no, she trusted my no. But for many of the kids that we care for, that wasn't the case, right? For many reasons, they have gotten no, and that yes bank wasn't full. For many reasons. Let's say they just came into your care and they're 8. Right? You don't get 2 years of saying yes before you have to say no to that kid. And so we're at that deficit. So when we talk about attachment, that's really what we're talking about, is how do we build trust and how do we get in our yeses? In TBRI, we talk about being really proactive and really purposeful about getting in our yeses. How can I say yes over and over and over again? And so as you continue to learn about TBRI, you'll hear more and more ways that we can say yes as caregivers. But I want to go a little bit more now in depth of this cycle, from just that distress and comfort when they have a need and then we meet the need. Now I want to talk more about what's going on in the brain and body in that cycle. So when that baby is crying out and they're in distress because they have an unmet need, what's happening in their brain and body is that the sympathetic nervous system has activated, which turns on the HPA axis. So what do all those big words mean? All that means is when I got to her crib at 2 a.m., when I picked her up, right, she was bright red. She was grasping the rails of the crib, right? Her pupils were dilated. Her little heart was just racing, right? That's her brain and body saying, you are in distress. Okay, we often talk about that fight, flight, or freeze, or that downstairs brain. That's where that baby is, right? When she has an unmet need, she is in that downstairs brain. And so her brain and body are saying, you have to stay alive. If you don't wake that lady up, you're going to starve to death. It's been 4 hours, right? And so when I pick her up and I'm going to feed her, do I just walk like this to feed the baby? No, right? I bring that baby to me and I go, shh, 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 right? And as I do that, what's happening is her heart rate is regulating to my heart rate, her body temperature to my body temperature. So by meeting her need, I'm not just meeting a physical need, but I'm literally training her brain and body how to calm down and how to receive comfort. And that's really important for us as we think about teenagers that we love and care for. When we think about, the 8 and 9-year-olds who are really struggling at school. So much of what they're struggling with comes from that lack of experience of taking their little brains and bodies through this cycle of having a need and then getting that need met, of being in distress and then being comforted. So I bring that baby to me, right? And I'm saying, shh, 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 shh. And as I pat her, what's happening is I am releasing the hormones in her brain and body to calm her down. So what happens is it then it's really called the cortisol brake, but it deactivates that HPA axis and she calms down. So her heart rate regulates to my heart rate as I bounce, as I pat, as I rock, all those things that we just do with our brains and bodies, if they were done for us, is what causes her brain and body to calm down. Why is that important? The first thing to understand is I know how to comfort a baby because I was comforted hundreds of thousands of times, right? There is no parent out there who doesn't want to comfort their baby, okay? But our brains and bodies are doing exactly what we were taught. And so sometimes if what we're trying isn't working, it's probably because we didn't receive comfort in a way that would work for our child. And so understanding that sometimes we have to learn new things as caregivers to help our children calm down.
The attachment cycle. The attachment cycle is a foundation for trust, self-worth, self-efficacy, self-regulation, and mental health. The attachment cycle begins when an infant expresses a need. For example, in infants, they use their voice to express a need by crying. When a caregiver responds to the child's warmly and consistently, they have given the child voice. They have let them know your cry is heard and it matters, just as we learned in the previous video. Trust that a safe adult will meet their needs. They have a sense of self-worth, feeling worthy of love and care, to know that they matter. Self-efficacy, or feeling of having a successful voice. The foundation of trust within the relationship is also being established each time we go around this cycle with another person. Every time we go around the cycle, it is like giving a yes, and yeses are important. Let's watch part 2.
The other thing that's important there to understand is that this calming down, this meeting of the need, will not happen without me, the caregiver. Children don't even have access to the part of their brain to calm down or self-regulate until the age of 3. And that part of the brain isn't fully developed until about age 25, 26 in women, until the early 30s for men. So that makes a lot of sense of our 20s, right? We thought we were grown and we weren't. Okay, but that part of the brain, the only way that grows and that they have connection to that part of the brain is through relationship. And so when I come and I give comfort, I teach my child how to calm down. There's no such thing as self-regulation before the age of 3. You're completely others regulated. That's how we stay alive. As caregivers, what's important to think about in that is that if I don't come regulated to the situation, my child cannot calm down. So what does that look like? That means, well, I'm sure this has never happened at your house, but this one time at my house, I had an infant up multiple times in the night. This was probably the 4th or 5th time. And my husband was sleeping through it. And I was mad. I was like, man, why isn't he helping me? How is he still sleeping? How does he not know this? Which I do know my brain actually literally changed when I was pregnant, so I could hear her crying and his didn't. But in the moment, I was not accessing that part of my brain, right? I was mad that he wasn't hearing these cries. And guess what? As I'm trying to comfort that baby and say, shh, 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 and I'm, stepping around my husband going, I can't believe he doesn't hear this, right? Guess what? My baby isn't calming down. Why? Because I'm not calm, right? I came to the situation, I came to that interaction with my child dysregulated. Therefore, my child can't regulate. And so I'm talking about infants, but I want you to be thinking about, what does this look like with an 8-year-old? What does this look like with a 15-year-old? What does this look like with a 16-year-old? Right? It's the same. So when we have dysregulated kids, whether they're infants crying in a crib, right, or teenagers throwing their backpack and slamming the door, if we don't come regulated to the situation, then they are going to struggle deeply to regulate themselves, because that's our job as caregivers. So when we talk about attachment, what we're talking about is this repetition of hundreds of thousands of yeses, hundreds of thousands of times I'm helping to meet the need of the children I care for. And by doing that, I'm laying the foundation for trust. I can trust that safe people will meet my needs when hundreds of thousands of times my caregivers have done that for me. I'm also building the foundation for self-worth and self-efficacy. I'm important to the world, I matter, and I have a voice. Right? 2-year-olds are supposed to think they're the center of the world. That's how developmentally this works. If we're meeting their needs and saying yes, right, they know I'm important and I matter to the world. So then when they meet their first friend and their friend takes their toy, what do? Give that back, bang, right, and hit them. That's, I have a voice and I matter to the world. That's my toy, I want it, and I'm going to get it. That is how this developmental thing works. And then we spend the next 25 years, right, teaching them to use their words and share and all of those wonderful things. But when I have a voice and I matter to the world, guess what I don't have to use when I'm 15 to get my needs met? My behaviors. Right? Guess what I don't have to struggle with? Unhealthy relationships. Because I know what this relationship is supposed to look like. I know that safe people will listen to me. So the stuff that happens when we're itty bitties, we see it times 10 in teenagers. And so when we think about, why does it matter, right? Why can't I just let them cry it out? Why can't I? Right? I'm exhausted. We see this pay off as our kids continue to develop. The other thing that we're laying a foundation for in this cycle is self-regulation and mental health, right? I'm literally wiring their brains to understand what it means to go from scared to calm, hungry to calm, right? Cold to calm. I accidentally hit my head on the door to calm, right? I'm laying the foundation in their brains. I'm building the wiring for self-regulation. And so this act of going to a crying baby, the act of holding a teenager, right, who's emotionally exhausted, it is not just an act of kindness. It is an act of foundational principles in their brains and bodies, and it lays the foundation for relationships and self-regulation throughout their lives. Now, oftentimes we're caring for kids who have lived in what we would call chronic stress, where for many, many reasons they lived on this side of the attachment style where they had a need and they were expressing that unmet need. But for reasons, people couldn't come and meet that need consistently and caringly. And as a result, that HPA axis that we talked about and those hormones that are released when we're experiencing stress are flooding their brains and bodies consistently. And as a result, we see changes in the brain and the body and the biology of these kids who have experienced that chronic stress. And so we need to think about that as we're caring for kids. Does their history tell us that they maybe spent a lot of those early brain development years with chronic stress and their hormones flooding their brains and bodies? As a result, right, their developmental age and their chronological age might look really different. The way that they express emotion might look really different. And so understanding that when we have those hormones flooding the brain and body, they're like bleach to the brain, where they actually disconnect the wiring between that downstairs survival brain and the upstairs brain, where we can be in relationship and put language to our emotions and think A to B to C and consequential and all those things. We don't have access to that part of the brain when we're in that stress. And so we have to think through the history of not only the kids we care for, but also ourselves, right? Did we as caregivers grow up in chronic stress? And if so, can we see that? Can we see that play out in the way that we're giving care? And in asking those questions, they're not just hard questions, because the good news is there's hope, right? There's hope for all of this. This whole idea of attachment is not just for ages 0 to 18 months or 0 to 24 months. The hope in learning and understanding attachment is that this cycle continues throughout a lifetime. It's never too late. It's never too late to work on our attachment and to learn not only to meet the needs of those that we care for, but also to identify our own needs and healthy ways to get them met. And so that's the hope in learning about all of this.
There are many situations, however, where the caregiver and child are out of sync, and this attachment cycle is not established in such a healthy way. It is important to remember that no caregiver is perfect, and no caregiver meets their child's needs exactly right every single time. But if the caregiver and the child are chronologically out of sync, where the child repeatedly expresses needs and the caregiver does not meet those needs, the child experiences chronic distress. The child does not experience those regulating interactions that help to develop a healthy brain and nervous system, and the child does not learn to trust others to meet their needs. Reflection. The attachment cycle begins when an infant expresses a need and the caregiver responds warmly and consistently, building trust and a sense of safety in the child. Repeated positive responses from the caregiver help the child develop a sense of self-worth, a feeling that they matter and they are worthy of love and care. When the caregiver and the child are in sync, the child's brain and nervous system develop in a healthy way. Ongoing and inconsistency can cause distress and hinder the child's ability to trust others. As we move into our reflection, let's list 2 to 3 examples of how the attachment cycle repeats in a current relationship, such as with the child you care for, your caregiver, or a significant other. Write down your current thoughts and feelings about the attachment cycle. It's important to allow yourself to process this information on a personal level. The 4 skills of healthy relationships. Healthy relationships rely on 4 core skills: giving care, receiving care, negotiating needs, and being comfortable with autonomy. These skills, which ideally develop in early childhood, can be cultivated at any stage of life and are essential for caregivers to model and encourage in their children. Care can be instrumental by addressing concrete needs or nurturing, meeting emotional needs, with both types being essential for healthy relationships. Let's listen.
Me, I think what's so powerful about the 4 skills is we're often teaching about attachment, right? If you work with kids, if you care for kids who have experienced trauma, you've heard about attachment. And we have to, use the attachment lens, and we have to, and then, you have a kid in front of you and you're like, what do I do? and the 4 skills are this is what we're working on. These are the things that if I can teach the kids that I care for these things, then they will go out and be. So the 4 skills are, to me, like the answer to this whole idea of attachment, this whole, and we could spend hours talking about attachment and what that means and what that looks like. But really, if we needed to boil it down, right, it would be these 4 skills. If the kids that I care for lead with these 4 skills, then I know that I've given them the tools they need to have healthy relationships.
Throughout this training, you will learn more about attachment patterns and the impact of attachment through the lifespan. You will see the thread of attachment running through all of the TBRI principles and strategies. So while the science of attachment is important for us to understand, it's also important for us to know how to actually use the science of attachment in day-to-day interactions with children and other adults in our lives. To support the healthy healing journey of children and ourselves, the 4 skills of healthy relationships help us understand how we practice healthy patterns of relationships. The 4 skills can ensure that attachment isn't just a theory we learned about in the training, but is something we can use to improve our relationships and our well-being. The first of those skills are giving and receiving care. Receiving care requires us to share our needs with someone, and giving care requires us to be open and flexible as we try to meet the needs of another. These skills are closely related because we learn how to give care by receiving care. And our ability to give care allows another person to express their needs to us so that they can receive care. We can give and receive 2 types of care: instrumental care and nurturing care. Both types of care are important. Instrumental care is care that focuses on concrete, rational solutions and needs. For example, meeting basic physical needs such as food, clothing, shelter, and giving care through extracurricular activities, allowances, and toys. Instrumental care can also look like advice given or problem solving. Nurturing care is that focuses on meeting emotional needs, like offering comfort, encouraging children to talk about their feelings, and helping children work through big emotions such as sadness, fear, anger, guilt, and grief. When offering nurturing care, caregivers are emotionally present with the child without immediately trying to resolve the emotion or solve the problem. Needs and autonomy. Negotiating needs is about acknowledging the balance between meeting the needs of others and getting your own needs met. With older youth, caregivers can negotiate their own needs and also model this skill for children. As we learn more about TBRI, we will talk about proactive ways to help children practice this skill through appropriate shared power. Autonomy refers to the ability to make choices and be in charge of yourself. We can also think about it as being comfortable in one's own skin and being able to rely on yourself. Caregivers who share appropriate amounts of power with their children as they grow will encourage autonomy. Autonomy plays a role in decision making, creating personal identity, defining personal values, and becoming comfortable with being themselves, even when peers may pressure them into change.
And I always encourage people to not don't overthink it. Those four skills in the day to day. And so, for example, when I understand those four skills and the meaning in practice, not overthinking it means, when my daughter approaches me and she's like, "Here, Daddy, taste this goldfish," as far as receiving care, it's hard. I'm like, no, and actually, like, where your hands been, but I have to be thinking about these are essential, ingredients to be able to do relationships in an intimate way. So I must engage, and receive. And she's practicing, giving, care as well. And in that day to day, those small, putting investments in the bank, they pay out when the wheels fall off.
Learning about attachment and the four skills of healthy relationship leaves many caregivers feeling unsure about where to start applying these concepts with children in their life. Thankfully, this training is designed to equip caregivers with TBRI principles and strategies to promote healthy attachment and teach the four skills. In the meantime, strategies you can start practicing today include giving voice and giving yes. Giving voice means encouraging children to express their thoughts, feelings, and needs, helping them feel heard, understood, and valued. Providing frequent yeses and responding positively when children express their needs help build trust and encourages them to use their voice effectively. Caregivers should create opportunities to give these yeses, such as setting up environments where children can ask for and receive what they need. Let's discuss. What are some examples of how you and the people around you give yeses? What are some examples of how you can set up a situation to give yeses? How do you give yeses? What are some examples of how you give yeses? TBRI consists of 3 interactive, synergistic sets of principles: connecting principles, empowering principles, and correcting principles. Ideally, when using TBRI, caregivers should be spending most of their time connecting and empowering. What is your strength? Think about that. What is your strength? And write that down. And then reflect upon what your strengths are. Many caregivers say that correcting takes up the majority of the time. Empowering or meeting physical needs comes next. And connecting with children comes third, after behavior has been managed and basic needs have been met. If we draw a pyramid around the 3 TBR principles according to how much time many caregivers spend utilizing them, we see that it builds a pyramid with a very shaky base. It certainly won't stand much pressure or stress. TBRI builds a more stable pyramid. In TBRI, we ask caregivers to look at the relationship from a different standpoint. The base of this pyramid is connecting, which aligns with the attachment cycle developed in optimal caregiver-child relationships. A strong foundation of connection where physical needs are consistently met reduces the need for behavior correction. With trust and connection, the base behavioral management becomes easier and more effective, resulting in quicker and lasting changes.
To just kind of revisit how important it is to have a strong basis of connection when it comes to the other principles of TBRI, of empowering and correcting, but we really have to have that strong base of connection. Can you guys maybe talk a little bit about that?
As you're shaping behaviors in the day-to-day, with your kids, be sure to keep the end goal in mind, which is, connected content, change behavior. And it's so good to keep that in mind, because what that means is before I even engage in trying to shape some type of behavior, I need to ask myself, am I connected with my young person, right? And I need to be able to ask myself that question in the moment, as the wheels might fall off in the moment. Am I connected? How do I connect, with my child? And then also after a behavior situation, outside of the moment, I need to be asking myself, am I connected? How do I connect, with that child? And I think that's so critical just on the connection piece, because it makes it difficult to engage with your kids the next time, right? If I still have a chip on my shoulder, or I'm still pissed off about something that happened, 2 days ago. So am I connected?
Yeah, I think it's foundational to TBRI that we understand attachment and that we're basing all of the other stuff from there. And so when we talk about a strong base of connection, what we really mean is before we can ever get to the correcting strategies, before we can ever empower kids, we have to have that connection with them because that's how they feel safe, right? And so if we are using that strategy wisely, we will attempt to correct behavior, we will attempt to empower kids, and it will fall short. And the reason is, if we think about how we were designed as humans, we were designed really for the first 2 years of our life to only have, right, that connection and empowering happening. I'm not correcting behaviors of an infant, right? I'm just feeding them and connecting with them, telling them how precious they are and building that attachment. And so we know that as caregivers, that isn't always the case, right? Maybe some of us didn't get those 2 years where that was all that was happening. And so we really have to keep that in mind, because we all are hoping to change those behaviors in our kids. But without keeping this in mind of that connection and that foundation, the other strategies will not be effective.
In this training, you'll learn more about why the connecting principles are the heart and soul of TBRI and ways to connect with those in your care, while learning specific strategies for connecting, empowering, and correcting can help caregivers flip this triangle. Caregivers may also need to shift their mindset, not just their actions. Willful disobedience versus survival behavior. You will hear this phrase or some variation of it throughout this training. In TBRI, the willful versus survival mindset is foundational to using TBRI with integrity. Like attachment theory, child development, and brain science, the willful versus survival mindset is a key concept that supports the principles and strategies of TBRI because it encourages compassion and mindful awareness, helping caregivers see why TBRI can lead to deep healing rather than just surface level behavior changes. For now, we talk about two main processes that relate to willful versus survival mindsets. Children are wired to adapt to their environments. Self-regulation develops from attachment. Humans are wired for connection and survival. These two needs are interconnected, and essentially all of child development relies on or is impacted by these needs. Connection is required for survival in humans, as infants are born essentially helpless and completely dependent on caregivers to meet their needs. They are entirely dependent on caregivers to meet their needs for an extended period of time. Babies literally cannot move without the help of a caregiver until they learn to crawl. When they are 7 to 10 months old from birth, their only strategy for getting their needs met is their voice. They cry when they need something, and then they wait for the caregiver to meet the need. As children develop other skills, they adapt to their environment. They expand their range of strategies they can use to get their needs met. For example, they might learn to point at something that they want or hold their arms up when they want to be held, and eventually using words to ask for what they need. An attuned caregiver also learns to read more subtle cues, like an eye rub that means the baby is tired, or a certain facial expression that means the baby has gas. As children grow and experience expected brain development occurs. They get more creative and their strategies become more complex. Children are incredibly resilient and smart. The process of learning which strategies result in their needs being met is normal, adaptive, and a brilliant process in all children, and really in all humans. The process of learning new skills and strategies to have needs met is part of development. Every child is constantly adapting to their unique abilities and caregivers and circumstances. The ability to be adaptive, however, can also lead to behaviors that are typically viewed as negative or disobedient. I'll give you an example. A 5-year-old is scared to sleep alone, might learn that if they ask their caregiver many questions at bedtime, their caregiver stays with them just a little bit longer, which helps them feel safe. Here's an example with maybe a teenager. A 16-year-old who needs more autonomy might learn that when they help out with chores, the caregiver is more likely to give them a yes when they want to do something with their friends. They learn not to resist when their caregiver frequently asks for help with chores. Simple. To summarize, all children develop adaptive strategies. Even behaviors that we would typically describe as bad are adaptive. Adaptive does not mean good or bad. It refers to the ability to adjust and respond effectively to changing conditions or challenges. For children who have experienced early toxic stress, they might resort to survival strategies more often because that part of their brain is overactive. Let's talk about self-regulation and how it develops from attachment. Children learn self-regulation through the process of other regulation and co-regulation with caregivers starting from birth. Children cannot learn self-regulation in isolation. Self-regulation is a skill that develops in stages, building on earlier experiences and being regulated by caregivers and practicing co-regulation. Another component of the willful versus survival concept is self-regulation. Children are not born, as I stated, with that ability. As we learned in the section on optimal development, development is experience expected and also occurs in stages, with each new skill building on a previously learned skill. The same is true for the skill of self-regulation. It is through the experience of other regulation that children can then practice co-regulation and ultimately learn self-regulation. From birth, caregivers help infants learn to regulate. For the first year of life, caregivers have learned to read their infants' signals and meet their needs. Infants are completely other related because they are fully dependent on a caregiver to meet their needs and help their bodies calm down after becoming dysregulated. As infants become toddlers, they learn to do some things on their own, suck their thumb, feed themselves a bit, slip on their shoes, snuggle with the blanket when they're cold, but they still need a caregiver for many things. This is when the children are practicing co-regulation. They are working with their caregiver to regulate. For example, they might know to ask for a snack, but still depend on the caregiver to provide the snack. They may go to their caregiver for comfort when they are upset or scared because they can't calm themselves without the reassurance from a trusted caregiver. When a caregiver helps a child navigate those feelings by providing comfort or teaching strategies like deep breathing, that child will eventually be able to self-regulate because their brain and bodies have learned to effectively navigate that cycle of deregulation and regulation. The important thing to remember is that regulation develops through attachment or through relationships. Children cannot learn self-regulation in isolation. We will talk more about self-regulation and how to help teach regulation in later modules. For now, hopefully you have enough information to understand that everything we're talking about is connected, which is why healing requires a holistic intervention such as TBRI. Time for reflection. Describe an incident from your childhood or young adulthood in which you displayed challenging behaviors due to an unmet underlying need. How did you make it feel? How did it make you feel? Describe an incident involving a child in your care where they exhibited challenging behaviors due to an unmet underlying need. How did you respond? The survival behavior mindset focuses on addressing underlying needs and supporting self-regulation, leading to more effective responses and challenging behaviors. The mindset is needed to effectively practice TBRI. Now that we've learned a little bit about two key processes that impact behavior, let's talk more directly about the willful versus survival mindset. A willful disobedience mindset is based on the assumption that children are consciously choosing to be disobedient, non-compliant, or difficult. Caregivers with this mindset look at the child's difficult behavior as a purposeful or willful challenge to their authority. They think a child is trying to be unreasonable and dramatic and could behave appropriately if they wanted to. With this mindset, caregivers often believe that their job as the safe adult is to gain compliance when they are trying to correct behavior. A survival behavior mindset is based on the assumption that children are doing the best they can with the resources they have in any given moment. Caregivers with this mindset assume that the behavior is the language of unmet needs, and they are looking for the need behind the behavior. They think that a child is using adaptive behaviors to get their needs met. With this mindset, caregivers believe that their job as the safe adult is to meet the child's needs, support regulation, and teach the child appropriate ways to get their needs met. Think back to what we just learned about adaptive behaviors and self-regulation. The survival behavior mindset suggests that challenging behaviors happen when a child is reacting from a place of stress, trauma, or dysregulation. This helps adults approach behaviors with curiosity instead of trying to force compliance. Understanding the underlying reason for the behavior enables us to address the need, correct the behavior, promote self-regulation, and reduce power struggles, tension, and the likelihood of future extreme behaviors. In this session, we covered the attachment cycle, the 4 skills of healthy relationships, giving voice and giving yeses. We introduced the TBRI principles and willful disobedience versus survival behaviors. In the next session, we will talk about TBRI connecting principles with mindful awareness. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next module.